Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second installment of the CITE webinar series. We're happy that you could join us. We hope that this presentation today provides a little appetizer for what you can see at the upcoming CITE conference in Savannah, Georgia. We will be in Savannah at the end of March. It is not too late to get your registration in, still at the early bird rate. You have until February 25th to get that in. Of course, you can still register after that, right up to registering on site. We'd love to see you. We have two excellent presentations today, one sponsored by the Teacher Education Council and one by the Information Technology Council, and I'm sure you will enjoy them both. And I'm going to give as much time as possible to the presenters, so I'll first turn it over to John Lee to introduce the first speaker. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Lee, and along with Liz Landgren and Marilyn Ochoa, I am a co-chair of the Teacher Education Council. It gives us great pleasure in the Teacher Ed Council to present our speakers for the first webinar today. Our first speaker is Irina Lubelnyansky, who is a professor of curriculum and instruction at the College of Staten Island and City University of New York. Our second speaker is Nellie Turnicki, Associate Professor of Educational Studies, also the College of Staten Island at City University of New York. Irina and Nellie will be presenting today on the topic of TPACK and differentiation of instruction, examination of mathematics and science lesson plans developed by special education pre-service teachers. So Irina and Nellie, I'll turn it over to you.
So this is Nellie. Hi everybody, and thank you for the introduction. Our title is TPACK and Differentiation of Instruction, Examination of Mathematics and Science Lesson Plans Developed by Special Education Pre-Service Teachers. We will quickly review the theoretical background of our research, and then we will concentrate on the study. The TPACK framework was developed by Mishra and Keller and proposes a complex interaction among three bodies of knowledge: technology, pedagogy, and content. NIES used Grossman's PCK model to introduce 5 levels of TPACK development, starting from recognizing and ending in advancing, which we will use in our study. Since our study deals with special education teachers, we're exploring the intersection of TPACK and differentiation of instruction, so we argue that the TPACK framework can be used to develop excellence in teaching, which includes differentiation. Just as a reminder, differentiation of instruction is responsive teaching, whereby the teacher understands the needs of his students and tailors instruction to their specific needs. DI, with the use of technology, offers the opportunity for teachers to engage students in different modalities while also varying the rate of instruction, levels of complexity, and teaching strategies. The study was part of a longer longitudinal research project that we conducted. The data were collected from a required graduate pedagogic course for pre-service special education teachers who learn to integrate technology into teaching mathematics and science to students with disabilities. Data were collected from 8 sections of the course offered in 4 consecutive semesters. Each section met weekly for 15 two-hour sessions. The first weeks of the course examined the theoretical aspects of the TPACK framework. Then the first lesson plan was due. Then the course examined teaching and learning with specific technology tools and digital content authoring. Then the second lesson plan was due. And the last 2 weeks, the course examined the importance of teachers evaluating and reflecting on their own teaching. 20 hours of fieldwork were required. 150 pre-service special education teachers participated. 95% of them females, 67% were between the ages of 23 and 26 years old, 43% held a childhood teaching license, and 38 of them high school social studies license. To assess the lesson plans developed by the participants, we used the TPACK levels rubric, an instrument that we developed and already validated. The rubric has 5 columns that represent NISI's TPACK levels of development, and you can see them in front of you, and 4 rows representing the components of TPACK adapted from Grossman's components of PCK. In the past, we found significant differences between the scores of the 2 lesson plans that our students developed for all 4 targeted components of TPACK and the total TPACK score with large effect sizes. And now Irina will continue with the current study.
So the current study research question was whether the quality of differentiation paralleled the TPACK level of pre-service special education teachers. In order to address this question, we first developed indicators of quality of differentiations by analyzing a set of 25 lesson plans developed by the pre-service special education teachers during the same semester. Then we took all 150 lesson plans and grouped them by their TPACK level. There were 4 different TPACK levels, and 2 lesson plans were randomly selected at each level of TPACK for further analysis. These 8 lesson plans were then analyzed for quality of differentiation of instruction using developed indicators, and those indicators were then compared with the levels of TPACK. So in order to develop these indicators of quality of differentiation, we analyzed the 25 lessons, as I said earlier, and we looked for indications of differentiation for both instructions and assessment. As a result of analysis, we identified 5 different indicators. The indicator quality none meant that the special education pre-service teachers did not provide any differentiation of instruction and or assessment. At the limited level, the differentiation was provided for instruction and or assessment that they were not appropriate for student needs. At emerging level, the differentiation of instruction and or assessment were appropriate, but instruction was teacher-centered and assessment was based on rote recall and memorization. At proficient level, the differentiation was appropriate for both instruction and or assessment, and instruction was student-centered. The assessment was provided at higher order level thinking. The exemplary, we considered the differentiation which met the needs of all students from multiple approaches like a UDL. Now, here we show the frequencies of TPACK scores on the final lesson plan. The scores range from 0 to 4.5, representing 4 different levels, and you see that largest number of TPACK levels were at accepting and the second largest at adapting level. So now we're going to look at the specific differentiation techniques by levels of TPACK. At the recognizing level, just to remind you that teachers are able to use technologies and recognize alignment of the capability of technologies of mathematics or science content, we had 2 cases. The first case, which we consider to be limited, was 2nd grade math lesson, which was very traditional lecture, followed by online game. The teacher paired students heterogeneously, general education or special education, and as a result, the general education students did all the work, leaving special ed students without any practice. The second case was a 1st grade mathematics lesson where teacher introduced the lesson by doing a lecture with using interactive whiteboard technology, and in this lesson we identified it as none because there is no differentiation except for assistive technology. To illustrate that, let us show you this particular lesson. So notice that the teacher prepared notes in the Smart Notebook software, provided students with instructions what to do and information, called students to the board to do an activity. In this case, the students were asked to sort the numbers from least to largest by moving bars around. And then the teacher with the students provided them with another activity where students had to identify symbols and what they mean and match them like a matching pairs with their words. So in this case, notice that they had to identify word equals with equal sign and continue. And at the end, the teacher asked students to answer whether they learned or didn't learn the lesson. So now let's continue with the other cases. So in this case, the next level is accepting level of TPACK. The two lessons which represented this level we found to be at emerging and limited case. So the limited case was a first grade science lesson where students were watching online video on their own computers and then completed sorting activity in a smart notebook. The same differentiation strategies was used for all students independently of their specific needs. The case of emerging was a first grade science lesson as well. Here the lecture was followed by individual work of students with multimedia tutorial. However, even though tutorial was appropriate for students, it was given after the lecture with the same information in a less engaging and simplistic way, so it reduced benefits of independent learning for students. At the adapting level, we had two differentiation cases, emerging and proficient. At the emerging level, again, class started with a whole class discussion, and it was a first grade mathematics lesson. Students completed interactive technology activity individually using virtual manipulatives, and different strategies were provided for students with different needs. For example, the teacher provided calculators for students who needed that in order to complete the activity. At the proficient level, it was a fifth grade science lesson, and it started with exploration in small groups followed by whole class discussion. Then the students did internet research and used blogs in pairs to share their individual findings, and the whole class read the blogs. In this particular case, the differentiation was reducing the number of questions to answer in the blog for students with autism and ADHD. At the highest level of TPACK achieved in this course, exploring, which is not the highest level of TPACK, but second to the highest, we expect teachers to actively integrate teaching and learning, integrate technology into teaching and learning of mathematics. So at this level, we found the two levels of differentiation, proficient and exemplary. The proficient was combined for fifth grade, a self-contained classroom where teachers started with whole class discussion while modeling construction and dynamic exploration of different shapes. Then the teacher put students in homogeneous pairs to explore other polygons and modified tasks and assessments to accommodate low ability students by giving them simpler shapes. And in this case, choice of technology supported students who were nonverbal visual learners. The exemplary case was a first grade mathematics lesson where a teacher developed interactive Excel activity with visual and numerical explorations and practice for students to get immediate feedback and self-assessment. The students were working in homogeneous pairs. The students were assisted by paraprofessionals. And in this case, it was a built-in differentiation that's strongly related to student needs. This case, we would like to show you the actual teacher's work. So as you can see on the screen, this is the exploration page that teacher developed, where students were able to click on those sliders to change the values of the numbers and explore strategies for addition of single and single-digit numbers. This is a first grade level. And then there were questions which reached to a higher level of thinking, which asked students about strategies. Then students at any time could go to practice and then work on the practice where they would put an answer and immediately get a feedback and a scoring. If the answer was incorrect, they would be encouraged to try again, maybe go back to exploration and model the situation to get the correct answer, and then come back and continue using the strategies they developed. Sorry, I have to go. So, in conclusion, All the cases that we reviewed, which were randomly selected, demonstrated that teachers of higher TPACK levels, measured by TPACK levels rubric, had higher quality of differentiation, which was based on our qualitative analysis of lesson plans. In the future, we are working currently on constructing an instrument that could measure the levels of teachers' differentiation in a quantitative way in order to explore a relationship between TPACK levels and differentiation levels through a correlation study. Thank you for your attention.
Irina and Nellie, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. That was very interesting. I think that the work that you all are doing is going to help math and science teachers, and really teachers in all areas, not just the STEM areas. The areas that I'm in the humanities, help us understand better how to integrate technology in seamless ways and prepare teachers so that they can hit those highest levels of TPACK integration. We've opened it up to questions. There's a comment that's come in, and we'll wait to see if some questions come in. As those come in, I'll let you know what they are. I have a couple that I'd like to ask you to start us off. One has to do with the context of the participants. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the experience that your participants had in learning to use technology. Was there a standalone technology course? Is it integrated into other courses?
Okay, so these are graduate students who completed initial certification in a different area.
Okay.
Are we good?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so our participants are graduate students in a special education program who completed initial certification in a different area as undergraduates. They did not have any standalone course on technology, so they really learned how to use technology and integrate technology in this particular course that we're doing study. Most of them did not have any formal technology education.
Okay.
So this is one of the few courses that is a methods course in mathematics and science for elementary special education teachers that integrates technology. So it has three functions: pedagogy in science and math, plus technology for special educators.
Okay.
So we're covering a lot in a course.
Right, that is a lot.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, we've had a long history, too, probably on our third decade now, of trying to figure out the best way to introduce technologies to students. The students that come to our programs now as pre-service teachers at the undergraduate level, of course, were born with these technologies, many of them ubiquitous in their hands. They've used them their whole life. We call them digital natives. That's probably a naive term, of course. And much of what we need to worry about is probably how these individuals, and it's not just young kids, it can be adults and even career switchers, but how they transfer those skills from their social life and other aspects of their life where they use technology to teaching. So I wonder how that issue of the transfer of technology skills fits into the work that you're doing with your students in your course. And is there a way for it to show up on the scale that you have?
First of all, let me just mention that even with pre-service teachers who are digital natives, we're finding research is showing that digital technology that they're using at home is not the same as educational technology. So we believe that there is learning that needs to take place for all students when we talk about educational technology. That's why we emphasize it so much in our course. So Irina can talk a little bit about the tools that she's using in her course.
Yes, the tools are changing as technology changing so fast that every semester we adjust the tools, but we focus on role of technology and how to use technology to bridge the gap between special education and general education students. So I think our instrument that we are developing will be able to show how well teachers or future teachers understand the role of technology to help students of different learning styles or different learning abilities. we do not try to measure how well they can use technology for their personal needs in this particular course. But we do take like initial assessment of their basic technological literacy to see whether they treat technology mostly for personal, like productivity tool, or whether they perceive it as a teaching tool and how they perceive that. So, and that shows that we have a variety of levels here, but majority of them who feel comfortable with technology as a personal tool are not comfortable with technology in the classroom, even if it's the same technology, like cell phones or something like that.
Okay, very interesting. Good. We have two questions that have come in, so I'm going to read those. The first question is, did students implement the lesson with children with special needs? And if so, how did it go?
Yes, they did. It was a requirement that they work with students with special needs. We have about a third of the students who actually implemented those lessons in self-contained classrooms, where all students have special needs, and about a third of the students who worked in ICT classrooms, where you have 60-40%, 60% general education, 40% special education students working with two teachers. Special education and general education, and about 1/3 who worked with resource kids pulled out of general education classrooms or out of situations where they didn't have that kind of classroom. Well, we found in most cases, we also have videos, which we're still in the process of analyzing, of all those lessons. So in most cases, based on videos and the reflections that our students wrote, the special needs students reacted very positively to technology, got more engaged, and many of them noticed that the students who usually are not engaged got engaged in the learning and really were eager and wanted to have more of those kind of lessons. They became much more interested in the topics. We had very few cases where we had problems when the technology was overwhelming for some of the severe disabled students, and the teachers had to withdraw those students, provide them with adult help to learn material in a different way.
Great, thank you. The second question has to do with the knowledge of the participants, the students in this study, of the TPACK rubric. How were they introduced to it? What was their level of understanding of that rubric?
Well, we actually, first 5 weeks of the course, and I'm answering because I'm teaching this course, and Nelly is a special education specialist expert, while I'm a math and science and technology expert, so that's why we're working really closely together. So in the first 5 weeks, we actually introduced the theoretical basis and TPACK framework. We had activities and exercises where students were given little vignettes where they had to analyze themselves what they think the level of TPACK is, how they determine it. Like they looked at the rubric and looked at the vignettes, video vignettes, as well as written vignettes, to analyze the lessons themselves, to get a feel for what is a different level of TPACK mean, and how we can improve integration of technology for students. We did not discuss our levels of quality of differentiation formally with the students, because this instrument we're working on is still in the works, and even qualitative indicators were not ready when we were teaching this particular group of students. But differentiation of instruction is an important part of the course, which is discussed on a constant basis, not necessarily in regards of technology.
But the analysis of the data is done on the lesson plans that the students developed. So the lesson plans are being given to us, and of course the lesson is being videotaped, and then we score the lesson plan for differentiation level and for TPACK level. That's how we work. We work with the lesson plans that our students develop. I hope that's clear.
Yes, good. There is one more question, and I think we have time for it. This question just asks about your instrument and whether or not you feel like you have a qualitative element to it. Would you be able to implement this in a qualitative way? Now, you do get to
The instrument which we already developed and validated, which is TPACK levels rubrics, definitely could be used in qualitative environment. We already applied it to qualitative environments. We had our students writing self-reflection, self-assessment papers about the lessons, and we use the same instrument on those narratives to evaluate. So it still provides a score, but we use qualitative narratives, what students developed in order to evaluate their levels of TPACK. The second instrument, which we haven't validated yet because we're still working on it, and it's in our current program. So at this point, we have those levels, differentiation levels, levels of differentiation of both instruction and assessment, and currently it is a qualitative instrument. It just provides categorical information based on criteria. We would like to develop like addendum which would be quantitative and develop more specific criteria, and that's a part of our current study.
All right, very good. Well, thank you very much, Irina and Nelly, for your insightful presentation. We appreciate the time that you've put into this research, and again, I think it has tremendous use in all of the fields and in the Teacher Education Council and, of course, all across site. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rhonda Christensen. Dr. Christensen is the chair of the Instructional Technology Council of site. So Rhonda, take it away.
Hi, thank you, John. I enjoyed that presentation. I look forward to hopefully meeting you at site. Like John said, I'm Rhonda Christensen, the Site Information Technology Council Chair, and I lead that council along with Melda Yildiz and David Rutledge. So our second presentation will be representing the Information Technology Council. The authors of the presentation are Tabia Lee and Cinzia Forasiepi. However, the presentation will be done by Tabia Lee, who goes simply by Lee. So Lee is an educational psychologist from California who's worked in the East Los Angeles public middle schools. Cinzia is an instructor of literacy and elementary education at University of San Francisco as well as Sonoma State University. The title of their webinar is 21st Century Critical Literacy, Pedagogical and Ideological Intersections, and I look forward to seeing this webinar. Welcome.
Lee, let's make sure that you have your microphone turned on. No, Lee, I think you need to take your screen out of full screen again because it's blinking again, and just make sure that your microphone is unmuted. Okay, we see you. Just make sure at the top of the screen, put your mouse at the top of the screen and make sure you select that the microphone is not muted on your end. How about we change it? Well, unfortunately, we see you, but we cannot hear you. Are you certain that you are unmuted at the top of the screen? Okay, let's try to test that sound one more time. Nope. Okay, let's give it one last try. Lee, I'm going to request maybe if you exit the room and come back in real quickly, if everyone can just hold on for us, and we'll try to test your sound that way, because otherwise we'll have to just reschedule this. At the moment, I cannot hear you at all. Okay, so if everyone, David, Rhonda, and John, I'm going to turn on your microphone while we wait for Lee to come back to the room.
Of course, this is how it would go since we were running smoothly right before we started.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, perfectly.
Great, great, great. Okay. Sorry about that difficulty there.
No, it's the way it to be. We'll let you go ahead and take control and share your screen again, and you can begin when you're ready.
Okay, good. So I'm audible now, and just want to thank you for joining us in today's webinar. Our topic is 21st Century Critical Literacy, Pedagogical and Ideological Intersections. And we're going to provide you with a brief overview of the topic of critical literacy pedagogy, which we will expand at Site 2016 in Savannah, Georgia. So understanding literacy, long-standing pedagogical literacy practice views students as passive consumers of information, paraded as timeless truths, doled out by teachers reduced to technicians and prepackaged curriculum deliverers. However, we view pedagogy as a process of discourse involving teachers as active agents in dynamic and inseparable teaching and learning processes. As Alexander reminds, discourse and act are interdependent, and there can be no teaching without pedagogy or pedagogy without teaching. So we note that pedagogical practice is central to teachers' work and is shaped by culture, language, technology, and history. Further highlighting its social essence, the New London Group defined pedagogy as a teaching and learning relationship that raises the potential for designing learning conditions leading to full and equitable social participation. Understanding pedagogy as a social enterprise requires teachers' active involvement in the what and how of teaching. So traditional approaches to literacy abstract methodological issues from their ideological context and ignore the interrelationship between the social political structures of a society and the act of reading. Excluding the social and political dimensions of the practice of reading gives rise to ideologies of cultural reproduction that view students as objects to be acted upon, rather than critically conscious subjects endeavoring to enact a better world. So we emphasize a critical approach to literacy that increases student and teacher awareness as active agents and opens up the possibilities for appropriation of others' knowledge and its re-accentuation with one's intentions, which in turn creates possibilities for the reconstruction, contestation, and validation of diverse learning and expressive modalities, cultures, languages, technologies, and worldviews. In today's session, we disclose no band-aids or quick fixes for the challenges facing literacy at all levels of teaching and learning. This is because the problems of 21st century literacy are very much so context-specific and remain ill-defined, and so consequently have ill-definable solutions. Rattel and Weber suggest that instead, we reconceptualize thinking about planning with wicked problems to focus on continuous resolutions rather than neat and tidy solutions. In this presentation, we highlight how and why systems thinking and activity theories inform an understanding of the pedagogical and ideological intersections of 21st century critical literacy teaching and learning. First, we explore how systems thinking expands the nature of schools, knowledge building, and literacy. Next, we look at how researchers and practitioners can use theories of action for pedagogical microanalysis and how holistic pedagogical analyses can benefit from an activity systems approach. And finally, we describe how the 5 cultural historical activity theory pedagogical standards can bridge toward increasingly emancipatory critical literacy teaching and learning. So practicing 21st century critical literacy requires that we transform our understanding of human action and activity, which will in turn recast our understanding of the nature of schools and the processes of teaching and learning. Envisioning schools as both instructional and cultural sites means coming to know them as places where knowledge and learning are deeply related to the different social and cultural forms that shape how students understand and respond to literacy events. So first, let's begin to look at schools as systems. The most prevalent conceptions of schools as systems are grounded in linear Cartesian epistemologies that use the metaphor of school as a machine. However, our nonlinear perspective utilizes the metaphor of living systems for schools as systems. As Oakes and Lipton explained, machine metaphors for teaching and learning often ignore the social context that children and adults always use to make sense. Its findings do not easily apply to the human behavior and thinking in messy real-life settings like classrooms. Viewing schools from a nonlinear perspective leads us to understand them as unpredictable, complex, adaptive, social ecological systems that are composed of diverse and dynamic agents who are dependent but autonomous and involved in processes of change and coevolution. There's a centrality of interaction and emergence and an emphasis on feedback loops, flow of information, and rules. And finally, schools are viewed as arranged in nested system structures. A systemic view of the educational environment as a nested system helps visualize how education and literacy are situated in larger conditions where the economy is the decisive factor influencing school policy and outcomes. As Bruner reminds us, the very medium of exchange in which education is conducted, language, can never be neutral. It imposes a point of view not only about the world to which it refers, but toward the use of the mind in respect of this world. Ultimately, language and education are not neutral pursuits. In fact, ideologies permeate pedagogical design, and the work of teachers influences and is influenced by ideological perspectives. Intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or disconsciously, racial, gender, economic, linguistic, indeed the entire host of inequities present in society at large are embodied and enacted in teachers' professional practice. And so a critical approach to literacy raises awareness of these systemic factors. Knowledge building and knowledge generation are also informed by systems thinking. When we picture knowledge cultures as a nested system instead of as a disparate system with separate realms that are not interpenetrable, potentials for progress are limited. However, when all the decision-making knowledges generate synergy, that is, when they work together, transformation becomes possible. And as Valerie Brown explains, collective thinking, learning, and inquiry brings together people from different knowledge subcultures, welcomes their differences, and forges connections between them. An understanding of schools as complex adaptive systems is essential for moving incompetent systems to competent systems. A complex adaptive system is a self-summer collectivity of interacting adaptive agents. As Kurtz and Snowden remind us, in a human complex system, an agent is anything that has identity, and we constantly flex our identities both individually and collectively. As agents in the system interact, system-wide patterns are generated, which in turn influence the interaction of agents in the system. So our starting point follows Aronowitz and Giroux's typology of intellectuals, which categorize social functions of intellectual activity and the knowledge produced. And our use of this typology is not deterministic. Instead, there's a firm hope in the power of the mutable transformative, dynamical, and dialogical self. We pay particular attention to the interplay between transformative and accommodating intellectual agents and the positive inter- and intrapersonal benefits of active agency. So once we understand teachers as intellectual agents, we can gain greater insight into their pedagogical actions. Activity theory conceptualizes human actions in the broader perspective of their systemic and motivational context and helps us understand the unity of consciousness and action in dynamic and emergent formations that change with the conditions. And this understanding helps us better examine how teacher orientation toward goals, conditions, goals, and objects or motives informs individual and collective pedagogical acts. So at the highest level, activity is oriented toward objects or motives and is carried out by the community. Actions are oriented toward goals and are carried out by individuals or groups, and operations are oriented toward conditions that are carried out by routinized humans or machines. So just as a quick reminder, examined and unexamined assumptions are central to incompetent systems, and it leads to practices that are disconnected to core beliefs. So it's important that we engage a systems thinking approach when we are attempting to enact 21st century critical literacy. So I want you to consider a scenario to really understand this connection. So let's ponder and think for a moment about two concepts that we often hear about in the context of literacy teaching and learning. So the first thing I want you to think about and possibly type into the chat is, what does equality mean in the context of teaching and learning? And then secondly, for a moment, just think about and share, what does equity mean in the context of teaching and learning? So every statement that we're thinking of and producing at the moment, and some would argue at every moment, is dripping with ideology. Not meaning simply or solely as in a dogma that cages thinking, but more broadly as a mindset or as a frame of ideas that informs and is informed by experience. Where things get kind of murky is when we start to think about how statements like, every student getting the same thing, so everyone has equal opportunity, is laden with many assumptions that crisscross ideological polarities like equality and equity. And so now think about how different approaches might possibly lead to different constructions of critical literacy as well. And that's why we differentiate between hegemonic, critical, transformative, and accommodating intellectual agents. For microanalysis, Argyros and Schoen's guidance on the evaluation of theories of action is instructive here to help us understand the extent to which theories in use tend to create a behavioral world that frees or constrains individual agency. So briefly, when there's a lack of congruence between a teacher's espoused theory and theory in use, that's when behavior doesn't fit their espoused theory of action. And in these instances, potentialities for active agency decrease, and one moves to the posture of an accommodating, hegemonic, or critical intellectual that willfully or unwillfully acts to reproduce the dominant social order. So taking a step back from microanalysis, we need to dig deeper to better understand how agents interact in complex adaptive systems. And we do that by expanding our understanding of how humans interact in the world. Mediating factors are central to and have a dialectical interaction with humans and their understanding of the world. Our individual and collective understanding of the world, that is, our past, present, and future realities, is influenced by mediating factors including tools, semiotics, artifacts, and activities, such as culture, language, technology, dialogue, collaboration, and simulation. And one of the big factors we focus on is language, because as Dewey reminds us, language is the tool of tools. Language not only transmits, it constitutes knowledge or creates reality. The use of mediating factors, of just reminding you, tools, artifacts, semiotics, and activities, is a mutual and dialectical process. So humans both shape the world and are shaped through the use of mediating factors. And this means that humans are part of their world, and cannot step outside and view the world from outside. The primary mediating factors, culture, language, and technology, also exist in a mutual relationship. Ultimately, different means of mediation can be expected to act in concert, and a change in one may well evidence changes elsewhere in an activity system. This leads us to understand pedagogy as an activity system. Viewing literacy events within the framework of an activity system makes it possible to gain clearer understanding of the actors involved and the aims they wish to accomplish. So our starting point or subject is the teacher as a hegemonic, accommodating, critical, or transformative intellectual agent. The object is the content knowledge that is accessed through and hopefully enhanced by a synergetic relationship between the mediating factors in play. The teaching and learning activity is organized by internal and external rules and the division of labor. Teaching and learning takes place in a community that includes other members of the school, counselors, administrators, teachers, classrooms, and so forth. And we can examine tensions and contradictions at various dimensions of the activity system for greater insight into leverage points for pedagogical change. And something interesting to note is that the outcome is the evidence of the teaching and learning activity manifested in the world at large. And so we show this as a reciprocal relationship because, as Engstrom noted, objects resist and bite back and seem to have lives of their own. So ideally, the objects of teaching and learning are dynamical and fluid, adjusting as anticipated and unanticipated outcomes manifest. In addition to viewing pedagogy itself as an activity system, viewing classrooms as networks of activity systems is helpful. Activity systems are historically situated, dialectically structured, analyzed as a relationship between participants and mediating factors, and they're changed through zones of proximal development. Systems learn, that is, they change through the expansion of the object that's being worked on. The object is expanded when the variety of interpretations that may be available and the contradictions that arise are revealed and explored. The expanded object, in turn, works back on the conceptual tools and other features in the system or related systems and reshapes them. So when we consider the intersections between teacher and student activity systems in the classroom ecology, we begin to focus on relational agency. And relational agency shifts the focus, at least temporarily, from the system to joint action within and across systems and helps us better conceptualize the impact on those who engage in it. And this will help increase and enhance our efforts at strengthening collective capacity for authentic collaboration, praxis, and critical consciousness. And as you're looking at this image here, in the second one, we could either look at two classrooms, so two different teachers as intellectual agents, or we could even look at a single classroom and replace the teacher as intellectual agent with a student in the classroom and how they're experiencing the learning activity. So we've described some tools for gaining greater insight into how to improve and change 21st century critical literacy, but how might we move from present-day receptacle recitation models of pedagogy toward dialogical and agentive pedagogical activity? And Dalton and Tharp introduced 5 standards that teachers can use to encourage individual or collective reflection on practice, to produce teaching that's socially productive, actively engaged, dialogically based, and knowledge generative. And basically, these pedagogical standards describe what teachers do to arrange and assist student learning in the same way that content standards describe what instructors must address. So they work alongside rather than replace content standards. And in the next slides, we'll focus on the broad ideas contained in each of these standards, and you can check out Dalton and Tharp for specific indicators that can be used to guide preparation for implementing the standards. So the first standard, joint productive activity, or teachers and students producing together, is an exercise of praxis, which expands the object of learning by connecting the contexts of criticism, discovery, and practical social application. So teachers and students must take on the role of conscious subjects mediated by the knowable object they seek to know. As Freire reminds us, praxis is the unity of action and reflection. It is a continuous spiral cycle of engaging in the intertwined processes of reflection on action, evaluating theories of action or activity systems, and action. When thinking about the second standard, developing language and literacy across the curriculum, Dewey reminds us that the principles of continuity and interaction are interpenetrable. Interaction reminds us that all human experience is ultimately social and involves contact and communication, and this is where working with different knowledge cultures within and across disciplines becomes useful. And continuity serves as a reminder that every experience both takes up something from those which have gone before and modifies it in some way. And this is where a focus on development becomes central to learning design. So multiple perspectives assert that children learn as they participate in social settings, not as they interact with knowledge, but as they interact with their culture's use of knowledge, and emphasize the importance of encouraging students to use their entire social and cultural background in the teaching and learning environment. So the Vygotsky space model helps us understand how we can use meaning-making processes to connect school to students' lives. It explores how learners interact with their social environment, internalize learning, and create contributions. And the Vygotsky space states that learners are always situated in two dimensions: public, private, and individual social. And there's an ongoing cycle where the learner interacts with various private and social sectors that ultimately alter the individual and social context. The fourth standard, the idea of cognitive challenge or teaching complex thinking, is enriched by an understanding of literacy development as a process of social participation, which shapes and is shaped by social interaction as a primary medium of instruction. So like Dewey, Vygotsky places great importance on the teacher's role in arranging activities in social groupings to keep students stretching within their zone. The fifth standard, instructional conversation, is vital to critical literacy. Dialogue is the means by which maximally systematized knowing and minimally systematized knowing are synthesized. It's the way we bridge knowledge subcultures and develop an increasingly critical view of reality. So as Freire explained, dialogue facilitates movement from the concrete context that provides objective facts to the theoretical context where facts are analyzed in depth, and back to the concrete context where new forms of praxis emerge. So in my concluding remarks, I'll weave in and out of this graphical representation and our references so that you can pause and view them later on. 21st century critical literacy involves a focus on pedagogical structures that provide students with the opportunity to use their own reality as a basis for literacy. And it views literacy as one of the major vehicles by which oppressed people are able to participate in social historical transformation of their society. A focus on polyphony or multi-voicedness and dialogic interaction is the means by which critical consciousness is raised, and the thoughts of others are apprehended, interrogated, and appropriated into new understandings. 21st century critical literacy unifies the mechanical act of reading a text with the critical act of understanding the social context to which it refers. Providing students with the supports needed to interrogate and selectively appropriate what is learned so that appropriated learning can be applied to concrete existential situations. It treats learning to read and write as a creative act that involves the critical comprehension and transformation of reality. It involves a posture of standing in inquiry that is centered on praxis in its social context. Students are opened up to the possibilities of new forms of knowledge to define and transform rather than merely serve the wider social order. It enables the oppressed to reclaim those historical and existential experiences that are devalued in everyday life by the dominant order to be both validated and critically understood toward the reconstruction of a new and more just society. Thank you for attending. I invite you to join us in Savannah, Georgia for Site 2016, where we'll expand on the topics introduced briefly in today's webinar. I appreciate your time.
itself. Can everyone hear me?
Now I can, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate that. It was very interesting. And I wonder, I don't see any questions in the question and answer thing right now, but I have one. Have y'all been able to apply this theoretical model to the learning and teaching environment, and see any outcomes from teaching teachers how to use this model, or?
Well, what we have now, it's a model, a bridge to accessing critical literacy in our current conditions, which, as we know, are currently very much standards-based. So that's why having, these cultural, historical, activity theory, pedagogical standards, it's something that's been resisted for some time, but it could be a bridge, really, to help people to understand, how do I implement a critical approach to literacy in multiple contexts? That's what we really like about it. It can really apply to primary, secondary, tertiary, or even informal learning environments. So that's something that's really powerful about it. It is more a pathway or a bridge so that we can have more just and more transformative literacy practice in all subject areas.
And do you include digital literacy when you're talking about literacy, I assume?
Yes.
Language literacy as well as digital literacy. Yes.
So this is all-encompassing, and it's really looking at the individual setting. It's very context-based and context-bound, so that's why it's a very broad perspective that you're seeing, and it really is just reorienting us to understanding schools as living systems, because that's the first step. Until we do that, we're kind of locked in this machine-like understanding of schools and teachers and learning and how all of those things interact. So we're suggesting an expansion, really, of understanding schools as complex, adaptive, social, ecological systems. That's the starting point, and once we do that, then we can start building pedagogy that aligns with that perspective.
I understand. I wish you luck. I was really struck by the equity and versus the equality, this frame you had on that. I think that's really interesting because I think of that a lot in assessment in the classroom. The equity and the equality of assessment that we do. We want to do individualized instruction, but we want to do standardized testing. So it's kind of an interesting. It reminds me of that when I saw you present that. Are there other questions, or do you have any other comments? I think we only have like 1 more minute. Okay.
Well, we will be there at site, so please feel free to come and see us.
Good. I look forward to meeting you face to face, and I will turn this back over to David.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the second installment of the Site webinar series. This will be archived on YouTube, so you can access it at your leisure as well. And you can also share the link with others and let people know that they can also still access these materials. I'd like to take just a moment to thank everyone that was involved in today's webinar. Our presenters, Irina and Nellie and Tabia Lee, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And thank you to Rhonda and John for their efforts in introducing and coordinating the question and answers afterwards. And of course, a special thank you to Sarah and the AACE folks that were helping us on the back end with all of our technical issues. As people have mentioned, we're looking forward to the site conference coming up here in Savannah, and I hope that we can see everyone there. Registration for the early bird is still open until February 25, so you have a few more days to get that in. And I look forward to seeing everyone there. We'll have a great conference. Thank you very much.